Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, January 7th, 2024, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. And I'll tell you, we fought our way here through technical difficulties, but here we are, victorious. Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. You know, we get together here every Sunday night to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian. Our real goal is to build community through conversation. You know, there's a lot of talk about Orthodox unity or administrative unity, and I just feel like, you know, if we all get to know each other and if we really feel like we're truly brothers and sisters in Christ, then we've already accomplished Orthodox unity and we won't worry about it so much. But we have a lot of interesting people, I think, in the Orthodox Church, and so I'm pretty excited to introduce you to another one. Before I do want to wish all of our old calendar Christians very Merry Christmas. Christ is born to you, and a Merry Theophany to the rest of us. And here we are back after a couple of weeks away over the holidays. So I'm so glad to get back to all of you. We are live on the AFR app. We're at ancientfaith.com/radio/live. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. We're all over the place. And so if you don't know this, we're actually now broadcasting video as well. And so you can see our smiling faces if you like. It's youtube.com. Go to the Ancient Faith Ministries page. Okay. So for tonight's, and I should tell you, you can call. You can join this conversation if you want. Call 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Matushka Trudy Richter, who is producing this show, will answer your call. She'll patch you right through, and you can ask any questions you like. Okay. Tonight's guest is Christopher Gonzalez-Aden, and he's a figurative artist working mostly in a type of biblical narrative. And so, frankly, I'm just excited to find out what that means. I think it's going to be pretty cool. And so he graduated with a degree in drawing and painting from Biola University. And so he's an artist. He's working from home, homeschooling dad for his 3 kids. But their youngest just entered high school. So it's probably winding down would be my guess as the kids get older. And he and his wife are at St. Andrew's in Riverside, California. And they lead the Burial Society ministry at their parish. So if you are not familiar with some of the details of like what a traditional Christian burial looks like, then you're in for a treat because it really is some interesting stuff. So without any further ado, Christopher, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad we're really connected and we can hear each other's voices. My goodness. Thank you, Lord. All right. But so tell me, where does your story start? Like, where were you born? Where do things begin?
So I was raised here in Los Angeles. I grew up in the city of Commerce, and I was born in Montebello. And between those 2 cities, I spent quite a bit of time living in Commerce with my mother growing up. And then my elementary, junior high years were at Montebello First Baptist over off 7th. It's a little tiny private school, and just kind of trudged along with my 30 friends through kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade, and then went to Whittier Christian High School, graduated there in '89, and tried to move away at that point. Moved up to Mount Shasta for a little while, ended up back in Ventura, and then God brought me to Biola, where I met my wife and some of my closest life friends. So, yeah.
Beautiful. There you go. So you tried to get away from Southern California, couldn't do it. You're stuck there.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. That's great. That was a nice place to be stuck. It's not so bad. But so you went to a Baptist school. Were you Baptist?
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange. I mean, technically, yes. At the age of 6 months, though, my father, who was Catholic, kind of had a notion to baptize me. So I was baptized at the San Gabriel Mission when I was 6 months. So,
The
I
San
was
Gabriel
kind of,
Mission. I love that spot.
yeah,
I love that
which was
place. That's
interesting
so cool.
because I was raised in the Baptist church, but my mother wasn't attending that church regularly. But I was there all the time because she would drop me off before work and then pick me up after work. So I spent a lot of time there, and it was really, I mean, I can't think of a time that I wasn't a Christian. I just it was around me all the time from my nursery school all the way up through high school. Um, so by default, I was in a Baptist church, but I had been baptized Catholic, and when I came into Orthodoxy, I had to kind of track down people because I was only 6 months. I was like, is there a record of me being baptized? And I knew that I had pictures of me being baptized in the Catholic Church, but I didn't realize where it was. And so my godmother at that time was still alive, and so I called her up, and she told me it was the San Gabriel Mission. So I went there and told them what I needed. I needed the paperwork of my baptism, so they pulled a book down from this shelf. It was so cinematic, and the dust kind of flew off of it, and they opened it up, and they said, "Oh yeah, here you are." And they said the priest that baptized you was actually buried out there in the mission. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting little find there. So.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat. Well, I would think even a picture of a Catholic baptism, right? Like if it's a Catholic
Mhm.
baptism, you know it was in the name of the Trinity, so you can just
Mhm.
kind of move on. But it's nicer to have the book and to get to see everything.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really neat. Well, I wonder do you suppose it was something like your grandparents were concerned about, like salvation? Like, because I think there's a teaching in the Catholic Church that you have to be baptized, right? That at some point you have to be baptized.
Yeah, I'm not sure. This goes back to some of my beginnings. My father was not was not somebody who I would say was a pious person. He was I think it's very strange when I asked my mom because I thought she had maybe instigated that because she had come from her mother was actually Jehovah's Witness and her father was Catholic, and so I thought maybe the father I knew was very resistant to any religion. So the fact that my mother said that at 6 months he was the one who instigated it, I thought maybe a pain of conscience, maybe a sense of responsibility kind of snuck up on him. So so it's very strange. I would love to know. He passed away when I was 14, but I would have loved to have like picked his brain about that moment that he decided he wanted to do that for me. So
Yeah.
um,
It's an interesting thing, right? Our parents, I think like us, right? Like we've changed over the years. Our parents change. And
mhm.
so you just sort of peer back at your parents from, times that you can't remember that are too long ago. And it's like, what were you guys doing? That doesn't sound like you at all.
Yeah, especially when they've passed and you can't, my mom's still alive, so I can talk to her, but and I can ask her questions, and if she can remember it, that's part of the story. But with my father, there's a lot of unknowns, so
Yeah.
it's you just
Yeah.
kind of have to wonder. So
Well, memory eternal. My father has also passed, so I definitely know that feeling. You can ask your mom, but you get your mom's version,
mhm.
It's like, well, I would have liked to know the other version of that story.
Yeah,
But so did you have siblings growing up, or was it just you?
I have older siblings and one younger sibling. We're all from different parents, so it's a very kind of interesting family tree. I'm the youngest of my father and the oldest of my mom.
Oh,
So I have an
cool.
older brother and three sisters who are older than me. Um, and all of those it was like this. I forget how old my dad was when I was born, but there was a span, quite a large span of age, just as my father would get into a new relationship or marriage and have a child. So we all have different mothers. Um,
Mhm.
but and then my youngest sister and I have different fathers. So, but we've all like we're my oldest siblings are planning a kind of a get together, which is we very rarely are all in the same place, but we're planning that for this summer. So that ought to be really fun because we didn't grow up together. When we get together, we just turn into our dad. He just was a ridiculous like goofball, and we get each other's jokes. I mean, for our spouses, they all kind of sit back and go like, "This is weird." So it'll be interesting to see how that happens.
That's neat. That's really neat. It's
Hmm.
interesting how we find that some things are actually kind of genetic and some things are
Hmm.
more, that you do have a connection with siblings even if you didn't grow up together.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It is really
that's really
interesting.
neat. That's cool. Okay, so mostly though, growing up, you were in Commerce. What was Commerce like? Because whenever I've heard the name Commerce, California, I always
Yeah.
think like this is what you name a city that's all industrial parks, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah. Well, there's a
who
funny story
named it
there.
Commerce and why?
So I never really thought about the name of Commerce. I was just a city of commerce. We had an Olympic sized pool, and there wasn't much else. I lived in an apartment, so we was kind of an apartment complex smashed between industrial buildings, and a little tiny neighborhood. But when I graduated from Biola and jumped straight into substitute teaching as a career choice, um, taking the CBEST, which was the test you had to take given by the California State Education to substitute teach, there was an essay part that said, what's something that you once believed but no longer believe? And kind of out of nowhere, I thought, oh, well, I remember growing up, and whenever we would travel and I would go into a city and there would be, the Chamber of Commerce, I thought, wow, my city's really important. And so then I started like, oh, wait, the city of industry, the city of commerce, like it all started to make sense. So, yeah.
I love that idea though. Like, what would the chamber? It's like it's a
Yeah.
chamber
Wow. Doesn't
containing
seem
like
like an important
artifacts from
city.
Commerce.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
We have embassies everywhere. Yeah.
Right. But so it really is a lot of industrial parks, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, even you'll get stuff at like some of the dollar stores around here, and you'll see that it's from the city of commerce. There's a lot of packaging and stuff that goes on. A lot of the if you think you know LA a little bit, if you are down at the docks, they drop the trailers off, then they put them on trucks, then come to Commerce, and then are loaded on trains. And so it's a stopping place where a lot of things are brought from other countries and then packaged and sent off to America. So
That's kind of neat, actually. It's sort of interesting. I wonder, was it
yeah,
all backed up at COVID? Wasn't that just the port of LA was crazy, right?
yeah,
You guys just
it
had
was. There
ships
was
for miles.
yeah, it was yeah. There was a lot of. I mean, everything kind of just sputtered along. So yeah,
Yeah, we would see it on the news and just sort of shake our heads like, oh, somebody's
yeah,
got to figure that out.
yeah.
All right. So tell me, okay, so you grew up in commerce. And of course, you're a kid, so you don't really think about whether or not there are a lot of industrial parks and whether that's in all the cities. Was it a good place to grow up? Like, did you have a good time? You had friends in like the school and all that?
You know, it was a hard. I mean, it was a hard place to grow up. I didn't have it as hard as others, but I think I was I was a bit on edge all the time. I was very light skinned, lighter even than now. My hair was kind of a platinum blonde, and even though I'm Hispanic, I didn't look it, and I was actually under my mom's name, Missouri, at that time. So it wasn't. I had neighborhood friends, but as we started to grow up, they started to get into other things, and then I had my school friends, but they all lived about a half hour away. So it was kind of an isolated experience. But I love drawing, and so it was kind of beneficial with being an asthmatic. And in the 70s, the sky in LA was usually slate gray.
Oh,
Um,
that's right.
and so I spent a lot of time inside, and I just love drawing, and so I would just do that a lot. So
Okay. Because commerce is like east, right? It's like East LA. That
yeah,
area.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
east of East LA, actually. Yeah, you've
Oh,
got
wow.
Bandini in East LA.
There
So
you go. When you're
yeah,
east of East LA.
yeah.
But so what was that like growing up, not just in the neighborhood, but like in your family? Was it strange that you had such pale skin? Did it
Yeah, my mom
interfere in
was
your?
my well, it's a strange thing because you feel like a minority
Mhm.
within a minority. I mean, you just get these layers. So I had a friend at Biola. She was one of my best friends, and still a dear friend. And she was of German and Japanese descent, and so we talked a lot about how when you were with one side of the family, you never felt connected because that other side of you was kind of looming over you. So when I was with my mother's side, they were, they didn't understand kind of the Hispanic side of me, which I didn't even know there was a part of me that was that. And then when I would be in at home or at school, it felt, like I didn't quite fit in either. But fortunately, the little school I went to, it was it was just a beautiful group of people. They got together just about a month ago too, but it's just very diverse ethnicity. So we kind of grew up like not even thinking about it. It wasn't a thing until you get activated and somebody energizes that kind of race card. So I was very fortunate in that. So, but it was definitely something that growing up I always felt a little out of place. I remember being probably just out of high school and I was helping up at a camp and I was helping in the kitchen and as I was walking to take something out, like I said, like I didn't look Hispanic, but the cook who was Hispanic said, "Are you Mexican?" And I was like, "Yeah, how could you tell?" And he said, "Your walk." And I was like, "Oh." So, little things
Oh,
like that. Either that I kind of I've learned to appreciate the experience and not look at it as something that was detrimental. It actually opened me up to being able to. I went back and taught when I was probably about 24 years ago. I went back to East LA to teach a printmaking class, and I had a friend. It was a Hispanic. It was a place called Self Help Graphics, and one of the other teachers there, who was an older man, had done a show on the different types of Hispanic origins, and we had a minute together. And I said, "So where do I fit in?" And he's like, "Yeah, you got your own thing going." And I was like, "Okay, fair enough." So,
well, I mean, I don't know. I think it does give you an interesting perspective, right? And
mhm.
I feel like there are a lot of writers who sort of sit between that and they end up writing really beautiful works thinking about those differences and what that means.
It helps you to see kind of the beautiful parts because I can draw from both. Like as I've learned to just be an artist, my drawing style is very Spanish and Hispanic, um, but my kind of sensibilities are not. So it's you kind of walking through these different things, and it also you see some of the darker sides too. You see some of the racism, and because you were maybe with lighter skinned people, they would not assume that I had any Hispanic heritage and speak a little bit more freely. And then, people who I grew up with would speak a little bit more freely because I grew up with them. So, um, and so you choose to, I think, forget those things in order to just kind of exist, and just focus on the beauty of it.
That makes sense. But yeah. Hmm. All right. So then as you're growing, you moved in high school, right? Did you and your mom move or did you move over to be with your dad or what happened?
No, I was still with my mom. I just went to, so because of I guess because of my complexion and my feelings of just wanting to get out of the neighborhood I was in. When my dad passed when I was 14, I was able to use the Social Security money that I got till I was 18, which afforded me going to Whittier Christian, which is about an hour away drive. So I would bike a half hour to a friend's house. I would get up at like I think I'd have to leave the house at like 6 in the morning, and I would bike along the railroad tracks in the city of Commerce to get to Montebello. And then my friends would carpool me to Whittier Christian, where they also went to school, until I got a car when I was, I think, a senior. So about three
Wow.
years of biking.
I,
But it was just a nice meditative time too, because I feel like there was so much building in me, to having that exercise and that motivation to kind of get someplace else, even though I didn't know where that was motivating.
well, and as the asthmatic kid, that, it is valuable
It's
to
true.
spend
Went
some
through a
time
lot
on a
of
bike.
inhalers.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's far. I mean, it did not
Yeah.
occur to me that you would live in Commerce and be going all the way to Whittier. That is
Yeah.
far. But did you love the school? Did it feel like it was worth all that effort?
Hmm. Um, not particularly. I mean, I I mean, I love what it gave to me because it definitely put me in a different, I wasn't so much in the survival mode that I think I had been. It was a private school, private Christian school. But there were, people had a lot of problems there too. It maybe wasn't so obvious, but there was definitely, there were teenagers are teenagers, and rebellion is rebellion, and we had we had some of the same issues at that school that were going on at the public schools. But there was a Christian framework, which at least gave you some bumper rails. So that was helpful, I think, to me, because after my father passed away, I was really confused and I was really angry, and I felt in a way betrayed by God, and kind of all alone. And about that time, the year before my father died, my mother had my younger sister, so she was very occupied with her, and so I had just a lot of time with biking and driving, and uh, so it would have been hard anyway wherever I was, because I kind of brought the hardness with me. But fortunately, because I was dealing with that, um, the difficulty of my father passing when I was 14, there were there were teachers who cared, and who knew a little bit of that story, and one in particular, Zane Mills, when I was a freshman. He was confined to a wheelchair since he had been a teenager, but he was a science teacher, and so he would call me in around lunchtime, and just sit with me. He wouldn't try to make things better, because he was, I think, having somebody who was constantly suffering. He he had a quick, harsh wit, but with me, he was very understanding, and I could just sit with him for as long as I needed, and he would be there. And when I was at Biola, I actually lived with him for a while and would help him uh, get into his wheelchair. And so we maintained a friendship until he passed after I got out of school.
Oh,
So it
that's
meant a lot to me.
Huh. That's really neat. Well, I do think there is something about, people who have suffered, whether that's through grief or
Mm,
through something else, understand that a lot of what you really need is just company, right? Like
yeah,
it's not that there are going to be some magic words, it's not some gift, it's not great advice. It's really just,
yeah,
if you could just continue to be here even though I'm real unpleasant right now, that would that would be so helpful.
yeah. Nearness without speaking is such a powerful gift. That's why I think when you look at the story of Job, it's so frustrating, because you just want the friends to shut up. It's like, can you just sit with him?
Right.
So,
Poor Job ends up in all these long conversations, right? Like having
mhm,
to explain himself. And, I mean, good
mhm.
for us because then we get the book and all, but it is a good point. I'm sure he would have really preferred it if somebody would have just sat down and like patted him on the leg and just sat there for a little while.
Yeah, which I think the dog, like, that's the dog, right? This
Yeah.
this quiet, just but I think that I'm suffering is, I think, through that, I mean, taking the best of my situation with all of the things that were going on in my teenage, and even before, and then reflecting on Job the last few years, the friends started to really stand out to me as those internal conversations that we have when we're suffering, that try to make sense of it. But
Mm.
by externalizing those conversations into actual people, it kind of helped Job to delineate his own space, and his own faith. But I see the friends, like, when I look at the friends in that story, I'm like, oh, those are my thoughts as I try to justify suffering.
I think that's a very beautiful reading of Job. That's really neat. Now I'm going to have to look back through it and think about
Mm,
that. But I agree. I think internally, you have all these debates and all these struggles and all these things,
mhm.
and yeah, just like Job's friends. Okay, so we are going to take a very short break right here. We'll be back with Chris Gonzalez-Aden, and we're going to hear all about all sorts of stuff that he's doing as an adult now. So we'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855 AF Radio.
Big in Heaven, a collection of short stories available now on the Ancient Faith bookstore. Sometimes poignant, sometimes funny, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes convicting, These stories of life in an inner-city immigrant Orthodox parish are guaranteed to shake your assumptions and make you see your life and faith in a new way. They are not for the faint of heart, but they are, very much, for all who want to embrace the truth more fully.
And you didn't have to ask Roskova for help. Cleaning, polishing, carrying in or out, any work in the church, the woman was a stalwart, a tovarish you could count on. No one knew her suffering. They never bothered to look into her eyes. It surprised me that most of the church folks at St. Alexander, the Whirling Dervish parish, didn't even know her name. It wasn't anything they thought about.
To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm here tonight with Chris Gonzalez-Aden. And I do want to let you know you are welcome to call in if you like, 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. So, Chris, all right, so you go to high school in Whittier, going back and forth on your bicycle for a very long ride. And then you decided to go up to Shasta for a while before you went to school. What was going on with that? What did you want to do in Shasta? What brought you up there?
It's so strange. It's a funny story. My grandparents, who I spent a lot of time with, they lived in Ventura, in that little Ojai in Ventura, and their neighbors were German. And so when I was about 17, Dieter said that they were moving up. He was a roofer. He'd been a roofer his whole life. His back and his knees were going out, and he wanted to open up Willie's Bavarian Kitchen in Shasta. So he moved up there. His wife had triplets, and so they were getting away from the city. And so I helped him get that restaurant started. And then he had kind of a falling out with my family. And so we decided to head back to Ventura. So we were only up in Shasta for I was there for about 6 months, I think. So, but what's interesting is now that we go to St. Andrew in Riverside, Father Josiah's wife grew up in Mount Shasta. So there were some people there that I was like, "Do you know these people?" And she's like, "Yeah, I know them." So
have you been to the Bavarian restaurant? Because
yeah, I don't. It's not there anymore. It was good while it was there.
I mean, I love a Bavarian restaurant personally, so I think it's good that you've put in some time making sure that we could get our sausage and our beer, and it's fantastic, actually. Yeah. But so you get back to Southern California, and did you decide right away, like, okay, I need to go to college, where should I go? Or did you have other plans at first?
Yeah, no, I worked at a gas station. I lived with my grandparents, and my mom and I lived with them for a little while, and she got her own place, and I lived with them. And my grandfather was just like, if you're not working, you're wasting your time. So I ended up working at a gas station in Oakview, which wasn't too far away, and then picking up some night jobs, cleaning classrooms. And I think spending a year and a half or so with my Chevron buddies, it gave me kind of the itch to get back into learning. And so I went to the junior college up there and started to, just get a few credits. And then one day, I was also helping out with the local church. I was like the only college age person who hadn't left Ojai. So in this little valley church. And so they put me in charge of like the junior hires. So I was having Bible studies at Caro's with these little kids, and just became really close to them. So we were just hanging out and spending a lot of time talking about God. And then one day everything just kind of got quiet, and I was like, well, what do I do? So I went up into the mountains, which are easy to get to in Ojai, waiting for God to talk to me. And I got up there and there wasn't anything. So I came back down and I called I did what I was supposed to do. Took a ram, and no, I didn't.
Yeah.
But no,
that was what went wrong. You had no sacrifice.
So.
You just drove up the hill. Like
that's true. That's true. So I came back down and I called an old youth pastor, a friend of mine who'd known me since second grade and who had been with me. He's still a really close friend of mine. And I called him and just kind of explained the situation to him. He was the youth pastor at that Baptist church I grew up in. And out of nowhere, he says, well, I think God wants to send you to Biola University. And I went, what?
That's very
And he said,
specific.
yeah, I've been, yeah, he said, he had gone there. And he said, I've been praying for years that you would go there. So I said, okay. And so we came up with three kind of tests, fleeces. And one of them was that my mom would sign off on it because I was kind of helping take care of my sister and helping her. And Biola needed to let me in. And also I had no money. So the day after, or maybe the day 2 days after that, I had gone to work because at that point my mom and I were working at a behavioral safety company, and the boss calls me in and he says, Chris, we really like you, and if you ever want to go to college, just let us know. We're putting together this fund. And I was like, well, actually, and he said, well, just let me know what you need. So they supported me pretty much I went and got loans and I worked all through college, but they pretty much supported all of my college effort. Just beautiful, yeah, beautiful souls in my life. Just a very, very much that sense of to whom much is given, much is required, because I've been given so much. They opened up so much in my life. And not too long, it was just like that happened, and I called Biola, talked to the admissions, and a guy who I would later be in the same dorm with, he answered the phone. His name was John, and it was just about like October, and so it would have been like heading into the spring. So I said I wanted to come to Biola, and he said, well, it'd probably be better for you to wait until the fall. And I paused, and I was like, I really feel like God wants me to be there this next semester. And there was a pause on the phone from him, and he goes, well, alrighty then, come on down. And I was like, what's going on? So I went down and hadn't taken the SATs, and they said, okay, it looks good. You've got 19 units from Ventura College, so we'll apply those to whatever you're doing. And yeah, everything kind of just happened. And when I went through the line, they said, what's your major? And I said, I draw. So they pointed up through a window and were like, that's the art department. Go get this signed off. So that's where I headed up. And I walked in the door, and there was Kate Simcoe and Barry Kramus, who would become my godfather in the Orthodox Church. But that started my kind of life at Biola University, where I met my wife and some life friends. So it was a weird story. People were like, so how'd you get to Biola? I was like, I don't know, really. It was weird. But it
Right?
all
I mean,
happened.
it's sometimes you do feel like when everything just opens up like that, it's like, all right, Lord, I guess I'm going this way.
Yeah, it's a trap door. Yeah, you don't have much choice. Yeah, but it's interesting because it was in a way so beautiful, the way things just kind of, I wasn't used to that. I had kind of rededicated my life to Christ, and it didn't mean everything was sunshine and roses, but suddenly this opportunity happened, and I was like, I'm going to do this. Had my mom's blessing, things lined up, and that's
That's
where I
great.
went.
That's neat. That's really great. So you met your wife there. How did you meet her? Were you guys like in classes together, or
Yeah. No, she was a
what
psych
happened?
major, but her roommate was an art major. And actually, that first semester, I had signed up to be a resident assistant, and it was at that resident assistant kind of meet and greet up in the mountains before school started that I saw her. I had a short relationship with a girl that was kind of long distance, and I was like, God, I'm done. I don't need anybody. And I turn the corner and I see this girl in penny loafers pitching a softball, and I literally walked away from that, and I started arguing with God. I was like, that's totally not fair. You should, why? But then I found out she was actually dating somebody. So I just worked to avoid her for a few months, but we kept running into each other, and we kept kind of just being drawn towards each other. So it took quite a while of, her breaking up with that gentleman, and then us being very kind of careful about not being in a relationship too quick after that. I was feeling nervous, she was feeling nervous, so it worked out to where we could just be friends for a while. And And then and then we said, okay, this is what I can't imagine not having you in my life, which for an introvert, that's a very unusual thing for me. So
That's beautiful. I love that. So did you two get married before you graduated or after college?
she had graduated because I had taken a couple years off after high school,
Right.
and so I was still at school for just a little bit more. We actually got married on Biola campus. Had a reception in the art gallery. It was really beautiful.
Oh, that's neat.
Uh, yeah, so it was but then I graduated, I think, in 96. Yeah, we were married in 95 and graduated in 96. So
Beautiful. So at what point did you start to discover Orthodoxy? You mentioned that your godfather was at Biola. So was it there that you were hearing about it,
yeah,
getting to know it?
well, it was interesting because there's a kind of a Biola story where Biola hired Father Michael Trigg who to be the dean of students, and he was the priest at St. Michael's in Whittier, which is a Western Rite church. And they interviewed him over and over again. They, like, what do you believe about Mary? What is this about the saints? Because Biola is a non-denominational ish school. So he got the job and he was excellent at it. And people just started to be like, where do you go to church? And so there started to be kind of more of a draw towards people who were interested in Orthodoxy. And a couple people at Biola got kind of caught wind of what was happening, and they started to raise some red flags. And so it turned into a pretty big kerfuffle that if you there's I had actually run across a book by a Protestant writer who compiled different stories about Orthodoxy in America. And he himself was Protestant, so I appreciated his kind of take on things. But in the back of the book was the entire Biola kind of situation, where the seminary was brought in to kind of evaluate things. And so in the midst of that, a lot of the art department began to be very interested in Orthodoxy. A lot of them became uh, parishioners at St. Michael's, and that's where Barry and his wife Beth and their children were brought in. So uh, that's kind of where Orthodoxy kind of came on the radar for a lot of us who were at Biola. So
So did Father Michael Trigg stay on at Biola, or did they decide we don't dislike Orthodox people, but you got to stop turning everybody else Orthodox?
I think the final conclusion was they wrote a paper on it, and the what I remember of the paper, because I only think I read the first sentence, was according to our tradition. And at that point, I stopped reading. um, if you're gonna measure things by 2 inches rather than the foot, then you've got you've got your own way of seeing things. Eventually, I think Father Michael retired. He had some health issues too, so that kind of helped him do that. And I think the official take on it was that Biola wouldn't go out of its way to hire Orthodox people. They'd be very leery of it, but they weren't going to fire anybody who was Orthodox. So it was they navigated it. I think there were some wounded people in it. I don't think it was a very clean, uh, cleanly exercised way of handling it, but they got through it, and
It
so
almost never is, though, right? I mean, that's how humans are, right? We just kind of
yeah.
bumble through it, and it's like, oh, in retrospect, we should have done this way. But, there
Yeah,
you go.
but I wasn't Orthodox at that point, and so watching the response from the Orthodox uh, teachers and students, it really stood out to me because it seemed their response was one of unity and being very loving, and the response for the people who wanted the Orthodox out was very aggressive and very um, not kind. So that stood out to me quite a lot, and so I became interested in Orthodoxy, and my wife was a little bit more hesitant. But then we got married and moved to near Pasadena, and we walked into our child birthing class, and in walked Father John Ryman and his wife with their first child in womb.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it was like, and they just loved my wife. I mean, any of the difficulties that she had with Orthodoxy were soothed by their inviting us over for dinner and just loving Christ and just being examples of open armed Orthodoxy. So
Look how God just sort of intervenes and hands you what you need. I mean, that's
yeah,
somebody prays for you, I think.
yeah. Well, it did. Forgive me, wife. It did take 7 years.
Well,
So
yeah.
there was a decision on my part that I wasn't going to be ready to be Orthodox if she wasn't ready, but also that um, I was just going to live as Orthodox as I could until we were both on the same page, and I didn't know if that was ever going to happen. And you just have to come to some sort of peace in that. That's not for everybody. I have godchildren and friends who've chosen to get married, and um, their spouses aren't Orthodox yet. But I encourage them, like, just just let them watch you change, which is what happened, I think, with my wife too, over the course of my being interested in Orthodoxy. I wasn't trying to convince her. I was just trying to become different. I was trying to just become more beautiful and let the church do its business of attracting. So,
There you go. That's beautiful. I love that. And I think that's the right strategy. I think it's just really hard to do. Like I think that's the right thing, right? Is eyes on your own plate, focus on your spiritual growth
mhm.
and let that be visible to your loved ones and, quietly be praying that they see that and that they understand what's happening and that they'll be attracted to it. But that's harder to do it's,
It is, but that's what God does, right? That's what He does. He woos us with beauty, not with merely being right. We know He's right, but it's not just about winning an argument. It's about winning a heart, and that's done through attracting and keeping someone. So it is harder, and we can't do it, but he can, and he energizes us to do it too. So when it does happen, I'm kind of amazed because I'm not. Yeah, that's I feel very lacking in ability, but it's it happens. So
that's beautiful. Okay, so you mentioned in your bio that you work in a sort of biblical narrative. Tell me
hmm
about your art nowadays. Like now that you're an Orthodox Christian and you're
yeah,
a family man, and what has your art turned into over these years?
I think I mean this piece behind me is one of the first pieces I did after college. It's a relief print of Jesus. I mean, there's a lot of talk with artists about, especially back when I was in school, about not just being Christian artists, but actually being artists who just happened to be Christian. I mean, there was just like your quality should be of a standard that it's almost secondary, that
Yeah,
your faith, you're not making propaganda. You're not.
right.
But for this
Yeah.
case, when we decided that I would stay at home with the kids, and my wife's a teacher with 0 to 3 year olds with special needs, this was my, like, this is Jesus. It's from an Abracadabra print. I just kind of added and made it my own, but it was my, like, this is my big Jesus print. So just to get it all out there. Um, but since then, I've also, when I say biblical narrative, I try to make the distinction between being illustrative, because I don't illustrate Bible stories. I try to evoke uh, deeper thoughts, deeper feelings about it. I try to use those as a jumping off place. Like I was saying with Job, I during COVID, I drew a large drawing of Job, um, and in doing so, I wasn't merely trying to just give picture to the story. I was trying to show some of the things that I was thinking about the story, evoking ideas and questions and thoughts and emotions. So that's where I think the difference between illustrative and narrative comes in.
I like that. Well, and I think it's very Orthodox, really, especially with the Old Testament, because I think a lot of Christians look at the Old Testament and they just see these like nice little moral tales. And we see all these echoes, right? Like we're
Oh
like
my gosh.
Abraham and
Yeah.
Isaac is also Christ walking up Golgotha, right? Like
hmm
there's all of this depth and there's all of this. So much of the story is not in the story. You have
Yeah. I
to.
mean, there's so, I mean, I just saw a little clip where a man was saying God does not waste anything. There's so many little things in the struggle between Jacob and Esau. Um, there's one of my drawings is Noah's sons. I mean, I really, there's so much in there that is to be chewed on. If I ever hear anyone say like I've run out of things to teach, then I'm like, you're not paying attention, because there's I was just like the other day we just had a glut of rainbows here in Southern California, and I was reflecting on like, boy, the only way to get to the rainbow is to have the rain. Like there's so much about you need that thing that you're afraid of to be there in order to see the promise. Um, there's so many applicable truths to that, and so that's where what I do and what I draw, I hope, doesn't isn't immediately read as being Christian even. I just did a drawing of Hannah, which usually you see Hannah and she's in the synagogue and the priest is behind her, and but I just isolated her, so it's just a woman crying. And I named it Hannah, but Hannah's petition, but it's not what I want people to see. I want to see the emotion and the longing in her face and in her positioning, because that's where we can connect, where they're not just moral tales, but they're actual uh, parts of our own lives that we're looking for some empathy in the scriptures.
That's beautiful. Well, and I think it's true. You really have to slow it down frame by frame a little bit, right? Because there's Hannah's lament, and then we're so quick to be like, and then there's Eli saying, you're drunk, right? Like
Right.
you can go on with the story, but then you haven't connected and they haven't come alive for you. And,
Mhm.
and especially, maybe especially so with biblical pieces, because they aren't, I don't know, like really well told novels, right? Where like they're so descriptive of everyone's feelings. For
Yeah.
biblical stuff, you really have to kind of think it through and infer a little bit and work it out. Do you find yourself doing a lot of that, like trying to put yourself inside the stories?
Yes, in some ways. I mean, definitely with Job. I mean, I felt suffering, um, both in just what was happening around us, but when I got COVID, there was definitely this deep introspection that I hadn't ever felt before, and the the ability to look at that story not just as an instruction manual on how to suffer, but as a map out of suffering, as a way to see the use of suffering, to be able to not waste any of it, um, was essential. Now, with somebody like Hannah's lament, I'm not a woman who wants to have children, but I do feel pain and I do feel longing, and so I do try to feel that and become that a little bit just in drawing, because the real art, I think, and I can't say that, I mean, I feel like I've made real art, but you can tell when a piece connects with people when you've put a bit of yourself into it, when you've kind of bled into the piece, not literally, but maybe depending on what you're working with. But you've given a bit of your soul to the thing, and tapped it on the head and said, you know, go to others. I've been blessed and amazed when people have found things in what I've done that I didn't intend. They'll tell me stories. They'll tell me what they see, and I don't, I don't try to challenge that. That's what I do it for. So that's that.
That's
That's where I'm not just telling a story. We're connecting. That's relational.
I was just going to say that actually, it's communion, right? It's coming into connection and relationship with people. That's
Hmm.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't want to let you go without talking to you a little bit about Christian burial, because I
Sure.
really love this. I had a son who passed away, and I was kind of a fresh convert, and so was my priest. And so he was like, "Well, what do you want to do for the burial?" And I was like, "Father, do all the Orthodox things. Just do it as Orthodox as you can." And he was like, "Really? Like, can I really?" I was like, "Go for it." And he's like arguing with the counties, doing all kinds of.
Mm.
But it was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It was just amazing. So tell us a little bit about like what goes on with the burial society in your parish and what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the, it's a really, it's a ministry. My wife was interested in this years ago, and we approached Father Josiah about it, and then we didn't follow up with him because we kind of didn't know how to. And then this young man came into the church named Maximus, and he was like, let's do this. And so he just took the reins, and he led the Burial Society, for a number of years in just a very. It helps that I think he was from New York. He had a way about him that was like just you wanted him to be on your team, and so he just made friends wherever he went, and so he had a relationship, built a relationship with a local mortuary who has been super helpful to us with a lot of transportation and and all of the paperwork, which is really important. I mean, I tell people as we talk about the burial society, it's really easy to, in a sense, demonize the mortuary industry, but really they have just filled the gap that we left. It's our fault, right? They've monetized it, they've done all whatever, but it's because. And so making the effort to take that back and to say, well, we're doing it this way. This is our way of doing things. Most of the time they're very respectful. They want to help us because they want to value that person's experience and that person's faith tradition. The Muslims and Jewish faith traditions have a long history of being able to work with mortuaries. So when we pull that card and we say like this is part of our faith, then they're much more willing to work with us. My wife has been involved with, I think, almost every female death at our church, and I've had a hand in many of the ones at St. Andrew over the years for the men, because we have two teams. We have the women's and the men's teams. And it's a beautiful, hard ministry that we wish we didn't have to do. um, and someday we won't. But while we can and while we have to, we try to attend to it because it is a very beautiful thing, and it's a very um, ancient way, and it's a very healing way to deal with grief when you are preparing somebody. Um, Typically what happens, we have a chapel at St. Andrew that's just for this purpose. We use it for other things too, but it was built for this in particular. So when the reposed is brought into the chapel, we'll prepare them and dress them and anoint them and put them in their casket and then prepare them to be buried with the service. We can wheel them right out of the small chapel into the large church and do the service, and then they can be taken to the burial site. So we've made it very easy for our burial society because we have space to do that, and we have a very supportive congregation who has seen and experienced the value of that. Our priest mother Cassiani just passed away about a month ago um, at the age of 90, and Bishop Basil came, and if you can, I think you can find it on Patristic Nectar. Bishop Basil gave a beautiful service a- about death. And when you're a part of the burial society, so many times I've thought, um, you know, the psalm that comes to mind: "Better is the house of mourning than the house of feasting." It keeps your mind on really important things, and to think you know, how many days, how many minutes until I'm in this place and somebody is preparing me. These are hard thoughts that most times people don't want to think about, but we try to gently encourage people to prepare for that, to have their paperwork in order so that it makes it easier for the families and for the church. But it can be a very beautiful thing in the midst of the preparation to invite the family in to say their goodbyes and to anoint with oil their loved one, and things that in this day and age, I think we would shy away from touching the deceased. Um, it's a very it's a very intimate and beautiful and hard thing to anoint somebody who has been your friend or your family. Um, but it also, in some way, gives you a sense of closure that you wouldn't have in otherwise. So
I think that's true. And I think there's there's like a love that you have for the body when you start to understand, like, oh, this is my friend, right? This isn't an empty shell. This is my friend, and I'll see him again. And there's a whole complexity to it, I think, that is really wonderful. And I think there's just a lot of fruit that comes out of following those traditions for burial. So I think it's beautiful that you guys are able to do that there. And I know we've started something up here in Austin, and a lot of parishes are doing it now. Because if you're listening and you're interested in that, there's a book called A Christian Ending, and look it up. It's in the Ancient Faith store, and you can read all about these things. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's really been a joy to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
It's really wonderful. And thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us. Come on back next Sunday night, and we will meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night.